Hi, hello everyone. Today we're going to be starting with a little demonstration. Here I have a beaker that is filled with water with a little bit of phenolphthalein added to it. Phenolphthalein is a pH indicator, and to this I've added a little tiny bit of sodium hydroxide, a base, which has turned our indicator pink. Now, interestingly, if I blow into this straw here, watch what happens to the color of our solution. Huh. Why did that happen? Why did the solution go clear? Right, this is a pH indicator. Think about it. Okay, let's answer that riddle by exploring why we breathe in the first place. You guys know why. I've said this several times already. If I ask you on a test, why do we breathe? I will give you 0 if you say to not die, right? That's not a sufficient answer. Why do we need to breathe? Why do we need to breathe? Well, cellular respiration is why. Now, what is cellular respiration? This is going to be the conversion of carbohydrates, aka glucose in this case, in the presence of oxygen to release what? Energy. That's the whole purpose of our respiratory system. We need to get that oxygen into our bodies so that we can better utilize the energy available to us. Right, we talked about this in a previous unit. How much energy do you get in the absence of oxygen? Right, if your muscles are doing fermentation, for example, producing lactic acid, how much ATP do you get? Well, it's what is it, 2 ATP per glucose? And how much do you get if you're using oxygen? Somewhere in the range of 36-ish, right? So you get way more ATP per molecule of glucose in the presence of oxygen. So we need to get that oxygen to all of the cells of our body. Now, this process obviously is carried out in the mitochondria. We're doing a little bit of review. This is where that oxygen is utilized to burn your glucose to produce all of that energy. And what then are going to be the byproducts? What are the things you produce when you burn sugar to make energy? Well, you guys know this already. We are going to make water, carbon dioxide, and ATP. Now, the water, obviously, our body has a use for. A small percentage of our daily requirement of water actually comes from burning sugar, from cellular respiration. But this thing right here, this carbon dioxide, is it bad if it builds up in our body? Does it matter? What do we breathe out? Right? What do we breathe out? Well, during starvation, glycogen stored in the liver can be broken down to glucose for use in the body. Just a little reminder about those important digestive system hormones, considering we didn't really get an opportunity to test on it. Oxygen we need to obtain from our external environment. Right, our atmosphere is composed of mainly nitrogen, 78%-ish, and then we got about 21%-ish oxygen in the atmosphere, and we have to get that oxygen from our atmosphere. And the products are going to be water, CO2, and ATP, and CO2 is that waste product we do need to get rid of. Now again, when I've originally described this, I described this as converting glucose, sugar, into usable energy, something our cells can do to use, something our cells can use to do work. Now, we breathe out carbon dioxide, and that is important. If our respiratory system is compromised, carbon dioxide builds up in our body, and this does have negative consequences. So respiration is the process involved in supplying the body with oxygen, and we have to dispose of that waste product of carbon dioxide. Now, how our body does this is by the human respiratory system. A lot of you might be saying right now, well, Mr. Salt, obviously this doesn't function without the circulatory system, and I'd say you're right, and that's the next system we will be exploring. But for now, we're just going to be exploring how we get oxygen in and how we get carbon dioxide out. So we must maintain homeostasis, that word again. So our respiratory system is essential for it because it allows oxygen to enter our bodies and get to the cells of our bodies, and it allows us to get rid of that waste product, CO2. Now, all cellular functions and activities are going to be fueled by ATP, and that is released through the chemical process of cellular respiration, and we need that oxygen in order to do cellular respiration, in order to burn that sugar, and without which we would die very quickly. How long can you survive without oxygen? What do you think? Hour, 2 hours, 1 minute, 10 minutes, 5 minutes? A day? Well, for those of you that have tried to hold your breath before in a pool, you know pretty well that you can't survive very long without oxygen. The general rule of thumb is about 10 minutes before you start to experience brain death. Now, of course, there's extenuating circumstances. If you are exceptionally cold, if you're in a hypothermic state, there's evidence that you can actually prevent brain loss for a little bit longer, which is why one of the treatments of oxygen deprivation from heart attacks or whatever other means is actually putting people into a hypothermic state. They've shown it reduces the amount of brain damage that person suffers. Now, when CO2 is dissolved in the blood, it reacts with water to form carbonic acid. Huh. Have you figured it out yet? Why did that beaker change colors? Why did the solution go from pink to clear? Well, by bubbling CO2 through the water, CO2 being released from my body, breathing it out, it actually formed carbonic acid, which dropped the pH of the water, thus turning it clear. Phenolphthalein is clear below in acidic pHs. So the optimum pH of the body is about 7.4, right? About 7.4. And so it's slightly basic. So CO2 is a waste product that we must remove. In the enzyme function lab, we explored what happens to enzymes when we go too far outside of that range, right? They have that ideal range, and outside of that, your enzymes, they just don't function as well, right? And pH then is extremely important for maintaining proper homeostasis and proper functioning of your body. So we need to get rid of that CO2. If we don't, it's going to lead to acidosis, which is a very serious condition. So the area available for gas exchanges is going to be what? What's that organ called where these gas exchanges occur? You all know it. It starts with an L, ends with an ungs. That is going to be your lungs, right? That is where that gas exchange takes place, right? Inside your lungs. Now we're going to break down the anatomy much more than that, but on a basic level, that is where gas exchange is taking place. Now, your upper respiratory tract, we're going to break this unit up into two different segments, your upper respiratory tract and your lower respiratory tract. Your upper respiratory tract consists of your nose, nasal cavity, mouth, pharynx, epiglottis, and your larynx, right? Everything up to here, that protrusion you feel from your neck, right? Your quote-unquote Adam's apple, that is going to be your larynx that you're feeling. Well, it's the entire structure that houses your larynx, but that is going to be your larynx. So everything from your nose, mouth to here is your upper respiratory tract. Everything below that point, right, your trachea, your bronchi, your bronchioles, your alveoli, your lungs, that is your lower respiratory tract. So what does your nose do? Believe it or not, it has an important function. You should breathe through your nose. Right? You shouldn't breathe through your mouth. I know that if you're under extreme duress, if you're doing extreme physical activity, you can have faster gas exchange breathing through your mouth, but doing that is not good for your lungs. Why? Well, you have tiny hairs covered in mucus in your nose. This traps tiny particles of dirt or pollen or bacteria or viruses, and it allows them to be flushed out of the body, right? That mucus can then be moved to the back of your throat where you can swallow it or spit it out. And you'll see that that's a very common defense mechanism in our respiratory system, right? Because if you swallow it, where's that mucus going to go? Well, it's going to go to your stomach. What's the pH of your stomach? Well, it's super acidic, so it kills most things that get trapped in your mucus. What else does it do? Well, your nasal cavity is quite moist, so it adds moisture to the air. Very important in the winter. In fact, breathing too dry of air, too cold of air can cause damage to your alveoli. And also, one other thing is it warms the air, it tempers it. And why does it warm the air? Because there's a bunch of blood vessels close to the surface of your epithelial lining in your nose, in your nasal cavity, and that blood warms the air. That's why it's so easy to get a nosebleed as well, though. It's because those blood vessels are very close to the surface. So again, we have our nose and nasal cavity, where we're going to have those hairs and that mucus that traps dirt, pollen, bacteria, viruses, those nasty things you don't want in your body. You have also a large surface area that's quite moist and very warm to warm and moisten that air before it gets to your lungs. So in other words, it prepares the air by filtering, warming, and moistening. Very important. That's why breathing through your nose is the ideal situation. You want to avoid breathing through your mouth at all costs. Another very common trend is, well, how does that mucus move around, right? How does we get the mucus from our nose to the back of our throats? How do we get it from our lungs to the back of our throats? Well, that's going to be cilia. Cilia are just little extensions of the membrane, and they kind of move in a wave-like fashion, right? They push that mucus. So they're going to push that mucus to the back of your throat where you can swallow it or spit it out. Whoa, that animation is, I'm not sure why it's operating at 10,000 speed right now, but you get the idea, right? You have these mucus glands that are secreting mucus, coats the entire nasal cavity, right? This is to not only moisten the air, but trap dirt, dust, pollen, all sorts of other nasties. And then your cilia will move it to the back of your throat. It kind of looks like a brush, the cilia. Now, air can also be taken in through the mouth, but again, I don't recommend it because you're not going to filter or warm the air to that same extent, right? You're not going to moisten, filter, or warm the air to that same extent. Now, the pharynx, we've talked about this before. We talked about this in the digestive system. Your pharynx is the back of the throat. That's where your nasal cavity and your oral cavity meet. Now, this is servicing, obviously, both your respiratory system and what else goes in your mouth? Well, obviously food. So it also services your digestive system. So this is your pharynx right here at the back of your throat. Now, if you remember, at the back of your mouth where your nasal cavity and oral cavity meet. Now, your pharynx if I was to swallow, there's actually a very important thing right here. If you remember from the digestive system, what closes off your windpipe? What stops things from going down the wrong tube? Well, that's your epiglottis, right? That cartilaginous flap that closes off your trachea such that you don't get food down your windpipe. So, beyond your epiglottis, beyond the thing that closes off your trachea while swallowing, is the larynx. Now, the larynx is your voice box. In it, there are two membranes, and we have muscles that can either keep them nice and loose or tighten them. And just like a guitar string, if you tighten it, what happens to the pitch? Well, the pitch goes up as a result, right? The more you tighten those guitar strings, the higher the pitch becomes. How about if you loosen those guitar strings? The vibrations get bigger and your pitch gets lower as a result, right? So the larynx is what controls your vocal cords and allows you to speak effectively, to enunciate, to make sounds. Now, the larynx is between your trachea and your pharynx, the back of your throat there. I am going to post a video in the description that I highly recommend you check out. It's of a laryngoscope, which is, as it sounds, a little tiny scope that goes up through the nose and then peers down at the larynx. And it's of a beatboxer beatboxing while a laryngoscope is looking at his vocal cords. It's fascinating. You can see the epiglottis closing off, and the epiglottis has a role in making some sounds, especially those breathing sounds that a lot of beatboxers do. And on top of that, you can also see the entire throat contracting, expanding. So there's a lot more happening here when you make sounds beyond just your vocal cords, right? That sound is modified and changed by the shape of your mouth, your tongue, all of these different things. So just to reiterate again, the epiglottis is that flap of cartilage that lies on top of your larynx that closes it off when you're swallowing. Otherwise, it remains open, right? When you're breathing, it just remains completely open. It's only when you're swallowing that it closes that off. All right, so the lower respiratory tract, which we will be exploring next lesson, consists of your trachea, your bronchi, your lungs, your alveoli, your intercostal muscles, and your diaphragm. Right on. Have a good day.